Giaquiv, hi everybody, and welcome to week 6 of the UDL Chat.ie Summer Book Club. The book we are reading is Universal Design for Learning, Theory and Practice, and you can get a free multimedia version of this book on the cast.org website. The chapter I'm talking about today is chapter 6, Designing for All, or as I like to say, Designing for Everyone. And the strategy I'm using for this chapter is to break it up into 4 sections, so 4 short videos based on the 4 curriculum components that the authors are talking about in this chapter. And the reason I've chosen it is because the last videos have been long videos. There's been an awful lot of information and examples and some reflection, but really as we're pulling it all together here, I thought it was a really good opportunity for us to take the time to engage in reflection around each component in terms of our own thinking and our own practice. So posting this video today, we'll post 2 next week on Tuesday and Thursday, and 1 the following Thursday, which will bring us nicely to the end of the UDL Chat.ie book club. So just starting off with an introduction to the chapter, the authors remind us that it is the learner and not the curriculum that is at the center of learning and teaching. And they give a really nice figure on page 68 of that. But also, and they don't mention this in this chapter, but that it's important for us to remember that curriculum isn't just the specification. It is the hidden curriculum, the obvious as well as the not so obvious, the social interactions, the learning environment, relationships between students, relationships between students and teachers. All of those things go into making a curriculum and not just the written document that we receive as teachers. And if we think about curriculum from these 2 perspectives, then in fact it is the curriculum and not the student that becomes labelled. The curriculum becomes characterised or defined by how well it supports students' diversities and to what degree predictable or systematic variability is planned for from the beginning. Now, in Ireland, we do have our national curriculum, so the teachers receive their subject specifications, their curriculum frameworks, and you work from that. It is important to remember that at the beginning stage, before that at national level, that teachers are involved in the design of the specifications, whether that is through development groups, critical friends, advisory groups, or sitting on different boards. Teachers do bring their subject mastery and their teaching skills to the table when these are being designed. But for the majority of teachers, that planning for systematic variability begins when we open those specifications to translate them to learning and teaching in the classroom. So this chapter is looking at the shift in mindset through 4 curriculum components, and they are goals, assessments, methods, and materials. They have threaded this chapter, the 4 components together through a case study of an American teacher. Time doesn't allow for me to go through that case study in these chats, but if you never read the chapter and just watched her videos, you'd get a really great insight into designing for everyone. So if you do have time, just start at the beginning of the chapter, click on her videos. Her name is Lindsay Travers, and you'll get a really good insight into her thinking as a teacher and practical applications of designing for everyone using these 4 components. So if we start with the first component, which are the goals, and the authors start with this because a really well designed or clarified goal is the foundation of our curriculum. So what we need to start thinking about is getting them right. And we need to think about this in terms here in Ireland of our learning outcomes, which are taken from those nationally designed specifications that I mentioned, and also our learning intentions, which are our goals to achieve that learning outcome. Now, Irish documents say that these learning intentions are developed by teachers and shared with students. However, I think we've moved on from there, and we can safely say that learning intentions should be developed by teachers and students together. And co-construction or co-design is a big part of UDL. It is touched upon in this book, but there is more to discuss about it. And just remembering this book is the introduction. So as you would get further into UDL, you would learn more about this co-construction or co-design with teachers. But in terms of goals and getting them right, what the authors are telling us is when we get specific and we begin clarifying what we want to achieve and also when we want to achieve it. So whether it's in the short or the long term. So what do we want to achieve in the first 10 minutes of our class when we're trying to hook our students, that important initial engagement piece? What do we want in the next lesson for this topic or even the next year? When we start thinking about those things, we can start considering our other three components of assessment methods and materials and what will be most effective for this particular learning outcome or piece of work we're doing for this learning and teaching experience. And a reminder that our learning outcomes are our standards or our expectation at the end of. But when we translate them into our learning environment, we need to continuously ask ourselves, what goals or learning intentions are we setting to achieve this? And we talked about this earlier, that something may be quite obvious for us as educators when we're setting a goal, but what we have forgotten about are all those hidden little things, those smaller steps that we had to do to reach that goal ourselves. But because we're now the expert learner in that area, we've forgotten about them, so we're not clarifying them for students, so we're immediately creating barriers. So from a UDL perspective, effective goals such as motivation and self-regulation are equally as important as the learning intentions or the standards. And the authors actually say that they feel effective goals should be clearly articulated in the standards and included in the assessment. And I think we're making really good progress on this in Ireland, in that we are moving that way with our key skills and our competencies that form foundations for our national curriculum. So we are making that progress in that our learning outcomes are actually supporting the development of those key skills, as well as reaching a goal of whatever that may be within that learning outcome. So if we dig deeper into this goal component, the authors identify effective goals as goals. So they give four characteristics of what an effective goal is. And the first is that it separates the means from the end. And what that means is separating the learning expectations or intentions from the means of achieving them. And if we broaden how we think about goals and the ways or the options that we give students to attain them, then we are going back to that idea of flexibility and options and pathways. Now, in earlier chats, I gave the writing example, where a student has been told, write an essay, write a story, write a report. And we need to ask ourselves, when we are setting that means, what is the specific goal we want the student to achieve? So if we're asking them to write an essay, is the goal development of their expressive language, how they structure their thoughts, or is the goal the act of writing? And if it's the former, so if it is that expressive language or structuring thoughts, and then think about the means that you offer to achieve that desired goal. Because if the means is write something, then for students who find it challenging to write, we are instantly putting up a barrier to them developing their expressive language, because the focus will go on the act of writing. When writing skills or development is the goal, then you do absolutely focus on that. And the example that the authors give in this book is, so the goal is demonstrating knowledge or understanding of a novel. And here again, ask yourself what means works best. So is it read the novel and write a book report, or read the novel and compose a report using whatever medium works best. And again, if the goal is demonstrating understanding, the second means is the one that will develop students' skills in analysing, in critical thinking, in demonstrating their understanding. Of course, at some point, written composition will be the goal, particularly if you're at junior and senior cycle where you are working towards your exams. But we talked earlier about when we give students those flexible options, when we have the opportunity to be creative in how they are expressing themselves and how they are demonstrating their competencies, that they'll take those little nuggets with them. And when they are then in a position where they do have to do that written composition, and you've done the practice on writing, with that being the goal focus, then they're going to bring those nuggets with them, and that is going to help them when it comes to that written composition. And then secondly, an effective goal considers the learning networks. So do you remember that wonderful week, the science week, as I call it? The effective, which is our engagement, the recognition, which is our representation, and the strategic, which is our action and expression. So we know these networks or principles overlap and they complement each other while still having their unique characteristics. And we talked about the importance of keeping unique characteristics while having that overlap in experience. The week we talked about distributed intelligence, and the authors gave us that lovely example of the fish who has hundreds or thousands of unique scales, but they all overlap to work so that the fish can swim. So when planning a goal or a topic of work, consider which network is most relevant. And we know that these three networks or these three principles overlap, but there are times when one comes to the fore, whether it's in for a full lesson or an aspect of a lesson. And by considering this and identifying which one is coming to the fore at a particular time, this will help you to be more specific and understand what aspects of your learning outcome must be constant and what can be designed more flexibly for. So if we go back to understanding the novel, yes, we will have to write at some stage, or whether it's for a full lesson or an aspect of a lesson. And this, knowing this and identifying which one is coming to the fore will help us to be more specific and to understand what aspects of the learning outcome must be constant and what can be designed for more flexibly. And again, go back to the earlier example. What was the goal? To demonstrate critical understanding of the novel, or to demonstrate competence in writing skills and strategies? And by bringing one of those to the fore will allow us to design more flexibly. Now, in terms of these considerations, the authors do give us 3 questions to help tease out these priorities. And I'm just going to read them here from my notes. These questions are on page 71. And the first one is the goal for students to build enthusiasm or learn to form appropriate goals? And that is our effective networks or our engagement. Is the goal for students to understand specific content or generalized knowledge? And that's our recognition networks or our representation. Or is the goal for students to master a skill or learn to create effective plans and manage available resources? And that's our strategic networks or our engagement principle. So the third characteristic of an effective goal is that it challenges every learner. And that is so important in terms of engagement and perseverance and resilience, and students having the opportunity and the support to be the best they can be, is that we challenge every learner. And this goes back to the options and the pathways and appropriate scaffolding and challenge. And by intentionally designing for variability, we are putting all of those in from the beginning, so we don't have to retrofit any of them. They are already there when the students walk into our classrooms. And it's important for us to remember that we're all on that learning continuum to expert learning that we spoke about in chapter 2, us as teachers and educators and our students in front of us. So if we think last week I talked about that post-lockdown reunion in Kerry, and some in the group are from Kerry, so they can get there with their eyes closed. They know the route, they know how to get there, it's easy peasy for them, absolutely no hassle. For others, they may be somewhat familiar with the route, but still need to use GPS at some point along the way on the journey, or double check train stops and transfers along the way to make sure that they get off at the right point, and may have to organise for somebody to meet them along the way to give them a lift or whatever. And then there will be others who have never been to Kerry before, so they're going to have a lot of planning to do. They will require GPS for the entire journey. They will require more concentration while driving, or even more concentration on the train all the way, because they will be conscious of all of the different stops of that they need to get off and that they're not 100% sure. And then for others, there's the added distance to it, because everyone is starting from a different point. So those traveling from Cork, it'll take them about an hour and a half to get to Kerry if they're driving. But for me, it's going to take over 3 hours. So I'm going to have to put more concentration into it, more perseverance, because I'm driving longer. And I'm also going to have to be more strategic. So where am I stopping off for my breaks? Will it be a rest break, a break to get a drink, to put more petrol in the car? All of those different things. And those learners, those people traveling those different journeys, need to be supported and have appropriate scaffolding along the way. But the same is true for the person who is just like going home. It is going home, it's just driving home. They need to not be bored, and they need to be challenged to dig deeper. Maybe they're going to take the scenic route instead of taking the motorway. And just thinking about that, thinking about those options and those pathways, and that challenge as well as support, because the two are equally as important if we are to challenge every learner. And then finally, the final characteristic of an effective goal is that it actively involves every learner. And this comes down to the co-design or the co-construction that I talked about at the beginning of this chat, and enabling students to see relationships between themselves and the curriculum or the curriculum goals, the learning intentions, through conversations, through self-direction, and being a part of a learning community that we talked about in previous chapters as well. And this can be as simple as teacher and students talking through the learning intentions and the learning outcomes and the goals, and making those connections between the goals and the other components of assessment methods and materials. Because if the students can see the connection and the links between them all, they are going to be more actively engaged because they have a rationale, they have an understanding. We as educators want a rationale as to why we are teaching a specific topic or a specific learning outcome, or why we are asked to teach in a specific way. We started this book chat with a rationale for shifting to a UDL mindset. Didn't just come in, and the authors didn't come in and say, here's UDL, now go do it. They have made all of these connections for us throughout. And it is so important that you do the same thing with your students, in making those connections. And then finally involving them in the goal setting. And we saw this in last week's example video of public speaking, where, yes, the teacher had the end goal, which was for every student to publicly speak at the end of the module of work. But the goals, so the smaller goals to get there, or the clarifications of the larger goal, were left to the students to make decisions with the support of teacher and with the support of materials if they needed it as well. So he had smaller goals set up around the classroom for them to choose from, or they could design their own goal. But this was all part of the conversation that they had before they began the lesson. So it's a really good video to see just how that teacher went about clarifying the goal for the students, and just their involvement then in choosing which pathway and which options they were going to take. So with that, we're at the end of the section on goals. And as I said, I was keeping these short so that we would have an opportunity to do some reflection. So the reflection for this week, and I will put this up on the Twitter feed as well, is to reflect on a learning experience that was challenging or unsuccessful for all or some of your students. And now think about it in terms of articulating or clarifying the goals for yourself and for your student. How would you clarify them, and then how would you articulate them for or with your students? And what changes would you now make to the goals? So when I say goals here, again, I'm talking about our learning intentions, because our learning outcomes are already designed for us. So what changes would you make in your learning intentions? And think about that in terms of the Monday someday that we talked about last week. It's Sunday night and you have your plan in front of you. You can't change everything. So what one immediate change would you make for your Monday lesson that would be beneficial to most, if not every, student in your class? And then in the longer term, what would you like this plan to look like someday when you have the time to make all of the necessary changes to it? And just consider how refocusing and refining goals from a UDL perspective could make the experience more successful. And yes, more successful for your students, but by default then more successful for you as well as a teacher and an educator, because the two are equally important. We talk so much about student engagement and student perseverance and resilience, but it is also important to think about our own perseverance and our own motivation and engagement, because if we don't see the success, and that success for us is our students' successful outcomes, if we don't see that, then we're not going to have or give the buy-in to continue with this. So consider that part from both perspectives, from the teacher perspective, your own perspective, and also then from the student perspective. So that's it for this week. Thanks a million for listening, and I will post the second section of this chapter, which is on assessment, next Tuesday. So chat to you then. Slán.